I hope you're ready to dive in with us because today we're taking a look at Keyforge's newest expansion, Dark Tidings. If you didn't know, Keyforge is a unique card game where each deck you buy is unique and no one else has it. This is the fifth expansion to the Keyforge line, and not only does it add some new keywords as well as a new faction, the Unfathomable, but there's a bit of a dark twist to that unique deck.
That's right. In this version of the game, you might get an evil twin deck. So, for the first time, you will have a near copy of another existing deck out there in the world, although there will be some tweaks to it. And that Unfathomable house is a new house of terrifying sea creatures that will now be vying for Amber in order to forge their own keys. They are replacing the Dis house in this set. So, there will be no Dis. Instead, there will be Unfathomable. And the biggest change and a new addition to this set that you're going to find in pretty much every deck that's going to kind of have an effect on all the other houses is the tide. So now there is a new concept, high tide versus low tide. You will have a card that tells you whether you have low tide or high tide. The tide, as represented by a tide card, is going to have an impact on a lot of different elements of the game. It's going to start in a neutral position between both players so that neither player has any side facing them. But if you choose to raise the tide, which you can do as an action by taking 3 chains, which are things that make you draw less on future turns, you can raise the tide so that the high tide section of the card is facing you. And many cards will say things like, this does an extra ability or has more strength or something like that if the tide is high. Or conversely, it may say if the tide is low, you will take some kind of a penalty. So there's kind of a tug of war between both players where you're trying to keep the tide high for yourself, but you do take a little bit of a punishment for that in the form of chains. So you have to decide when is the right time to do it. Now that really is, I think it's easy to say, the big thing that this whole set is built around. Now, again, we got the chance to play with a couple of decks from a randomly arranged starter set, so there's a lot of things that I'm sure we have not seen. So this is not a truly comprehensive take on it. But in terms of what we saw, Will, what did you think of, I guess, the tide itself? Because I do think that's kind of the big thing here.
I enjoyed the idea of the tide cards because it's you take chains. Just there are chains are not new from this. They were on other cards in previous sets that usually were more powerful. But this way it felt more like a tug of war. And you could take chains when it was optimal for you. You felt like you had enough cards in hand, you didn't have to worry too much. And you knew your tide cards were coming up. And there are other cards as well that actually reward you when you take it. So it's not simply just setting up so your cards are stronger, but you may get something that you archive a card every time you take the tide. So then it actually can even affect opponents. So you'll go back and forth helping each other. And then since you're both getting chains, it doesn't feel like it stinks if you have a deck that has a lot of chains, your opponent doesn't. So to me, I do think that is an enjoyable mechanic. The only problem is this going to be something that will be just from Dark Tidings, or will we see it in future sets? Is it going to be for now on every set will have tide card involved? So I don't know how that's going to work exactly.
I think even regardless of future sets, a question too is how well will they work against past decks that don't have the tide in them? Is it going to feel too much like, because if you don't have cards that matter in regard to the tide, are you only raising it to stop your opponent? And does that kind of feel not as much fun as using it for your own benefit?
Like I said, there are a couple cards, I'll put them on screen now, that we saw that will say things whenever a player takes the high tide, which helps a little bit with there.
That's
But
true.
it does feel personally that I think this would be best used when everyone's in staying in the high tide set. Or
Yeah,
sorry, not high
the
tide
dark
set, the
tidings.
dark
Yeah,
tide set.
which to me is fine. I'm like I'm okay with that. Maybe probably it's not great if you don't want every set to be that way because that kind of hurts the longevity and also the viability of previous
I
decks.
also don't know about tournament playing stuff.
Right, right. But I think it can be kind of fun, and I do really like the tide mechanic like you. I think that it is an interesting thing. It brings chains into the mix more, which aren't always a big part of play, and it just adds an interesting extra element that isn't too complicated. It's just you have to know, am I have high tide or do I not? And my cards will be stronger or not. And I think it adds another interesting kind of mini game that you're playing with your opponent, which I liked.
I do want to point out, by the way, which should have been shown with the cards that we showed earlier, that the tides go for all the groups. Everyone's going to usually care about it in some way, or at least have some cards involving that. Though, if you haven't guessed, ones who really care about it are the Unfathomable. After all, they are the sea-based race.
Yeah.
And a lot of, not in addition to manipulating the tide or just wanting it on their side, they'll also like to manipulate their opponents. They're going to do a lot of exhausting your opponent cards or punishing them. Like there's a card that makes it so those creatures do not unexhaust. You can pretty much pin something down, which is great if there's something that rewards for attacking or reaping, and you're like, just leave that there.
Yeah, they are all about controlling your opponent's stuff, exhausting them, which is pretty good. We both found them to feel pretty strong. I think as the new house, it makes sense that they're gonna, they don't want to come out with a weaker house as the new shiny thing from the set, and it feels like they did their job with that. And thematically, they are pretty cool too. But I'm glad that it's not just them who controls the tide, like you said, even though I think probably overall they're going to have more stuff going on with it. They have
Right.
mixed that into the old houses as well. So you get to play around with it, even if you don't have those guys in every deck, which
Oh
is
yeah,
good.
I mean, even though we had 2 decks, only one of them had the Unfathomable in them. I think the other deck was just as happy to get to get the high tide on its side, especially with some of the cards we've shown before. It can just be very helpful, and also, like you said earlier, denying an opponent high tide is also useful.
Yeah. So the tide is really the big kind of mechanical change, but there is another smaller thing that we really liked. There's a new type of card, a choice card, that just like it sounds like gives you two choices you can choose between when you play it. So it could be, gaining some amber or dealing damage in a certain way, but you have to decide one of the two things when you play it. And it's a simple idea. It's not as if it's like this wasn't hard to develop. It's you
Right.
just
In
choose one of
fact,
two things.
technically, there were some cards like it in previous sets, but from what we can tell, this is the first time it's sort of like it's a cycle because the ones in before, like, there are some choices. This one would be like their cards are even named in a way similar to if you've ever seen split cards in Magic. It's like heal or deal damage. We'll put up the name of the cards here and maybe some of the Magic cards. Like the titles make sense
Yeah.
as like what the why you're making a choice, and they're really helpful because if you've ever played Keyforge, sometimes you feel like you're in a rut. Like, I want to go to this house, but I don't really want to. Don't have anything to do. Giving options on one card, I don't think anyone give Amber, but I think that's worth it. Just giving you more choices if you choose that house.
Yeah, we are always fans of this in any kind of tabletop game. Anytime there's a card that you can do this or that, that's great. If I get to make a decision depending on my situation, that makes me very happy. And it lends itself so well to Keyforge because that's kind of what Keyforge on a base level is all about: is which house do I want to use this turn? So it makes perfect sense, and it just gives you another layer of choice within the choice, the first choice that you're making.
Yeah, and for me, I really like it because I'm used to actually, building my decks and stuff beforehand when Keyforge, are pre-built and stay like that. And it makes me feel not as pigeonholed. So, and they also don't feel too strong either. Like, I don't feel like, oh my God, you got all the choice cards or something. I think it just makes things just a bit more relaxing, or at least more strategies. You don't feel as scared when you're playing them. So hopefully this is something that I can easily see go to other expansions, and I hope it does.
Yeah, I think it's a no-brainer for to continue that. And again, anything that's like feels new but doesn't make you learn a keyword or a new rule, I'm very much in favor of that kind of thing. So the evil twin concept is pretty cool. We haven't had the chance to see any evil twin decks in person. I don't know exactly how they're not common, but I don't think they're like super super rare either.
Right.
But I just think it is a neat concept in general. Probably not something that I feel like is really going to have a huge impact on your play or enjoyment of it, but it's kind of fun. It's like a cute thing that they added.
I like the idea, and it feels, even though I know they're actually different cards, it feels like an alternate art you can earn. So
Yeah.
it's sort of cool, and especially it'd be really awesome if you can meet the person who has your other deck.
Yeah, maybe that's your soulmate or something if you can if you can find
I
it.
think in this case, it's more like your like
Your arch
eternal rival.
nemesis.
Yes.
It could be that too. So, we are definitely on the more casual end of Keyforge
hmm
players. So I can't comment on like, how viable is this in tournament play? How strong is this set compared to any other set? But in terms of just the feel of it and the new mechanics, I really enjoy them. I like the look and the theme of the new house and the overall systems in play. I think the Tide thing is cool. So I'm definitely in favor of it. You know, again, not looking at its the power of the cards. I've really enjoyed the new things that they added in our time playing it.
I will say that the Unfathomable are a house I really enjoy. In fact, they're probably on the much higher end. I need to play with them a
Mhm.
bit more before I say if they replace in my top 3, but they're definitely, I think, really fun to have around because they give you that extra little bit of control. Speaking of houses, I do want to bring up the fact that because you mentioned this to me earlier, that with this set, there are currently 3 houses who pretty much have always been around and one that's been gone for a while.
Yeah.
So Logos, Untamed, and Shadows seem to be pretty consistent. Probably, at least in my opinion, because Logos and Shadows have pretty much what they do is not many other houses do very well. So it's like we need them in there so people can use the archive mechanic or something. While Untamed to me are almost like it reminds me of Green and Magic. It's the creature heavy. It's the everyone. It's comfortable with everyone and just actually just play the game.
Mhm.
Mars, on the other hand, I remember weren't really considered that strong. And I just feel like my guess is they haven't been brought back because they don't know what to do with them.
Yeah, which is kind of interesting. I hope that they figure it out at some point because, or not. I mean, I guess who cares if they if they never come back? I'm sure there's some diehard fans who really like them, but it can't be that hard. Like I'm sure the wizards at Fantasy Flight could come up with something that will make them viable. Maybe whatever the next like Tide thing is something that will boost them a little bit, or maybe they come back as like a a Mars plot, like it's called something else, but it's sort of like the evolved version of them in terms of the theme somehow.
Right, because I don't. The previous set, sorry, not faction, did not introduce a new faction. So I can imagine them, the next one, maybe giving Mars the spotlight. It's just a matter of making it so people actually want to play with them.
Another small thing to note about this set is that they have changed the packaging of the individual decks. They're no longer cardboard deck holders. They're now more like a booster pack wrapper that you would find for a typical pack of cards, which I'm sure some people will be disappointed by, but I think that if you're collecting Keyforge, you probably have some kind of storage system in place already, so it won't really matter to you that much. But it is interesting to note. I'm sure it must be cheaper for them to produce, is my guess. Otherwise, I don't know why they would make that change, but maybe it just feels a little more satisfying to like tear that open, you know?
I look, I won't lie. As someone who does a lot of TCGs and things like that, it does. It feels really nice because the box, I feel like I don't want to damage it because it's cardboard. But this is like, oh, can I open? What am I going to get in here? Am I getting a Dark Twin?
Maybe they're trying to tap into that, yeah.
They are, and they're successfully doing so.
So Dark Tidings, it had a bit of a troubled release schedule, but it should be hitting stores everywhere pretty soon if you can't already grab a copy right now. And I would be very interested to hear what people think about it. You know, it's been kind of a while, I feel like, since there's been a new Keyforge, and also with the pandemic, it's been tough for a lot of these games to kind of find some footing
Right.
recently. So I definitely want to hear from people what they think about this new set and how they think it'll impact the game.
Overall, I think Jonathan agrees with me. We had a lot of fun with this expansion. I'm excited to see what else the Unfathomable do. And while I'm not sure, while I enjoy the Tide, if that's going to be something that continues forward with Keyforge, I can definitely see the choice cards as well as the Dark Twins being a more common reoccurring factor in expansions. Let us know what you think if you're a big Keyforge fan, if you're excited to pick the set up, and if you're a little bit worried about what happened and you're just happy it's now out and available. Let us know in those comments down below. Did the Unfathomable break your top 3 list? Is it now one of your favorite houses? Or is it boring to you, or worse, do you hate playing against it?
Yeah, let us know which cards or combos you have found that you think are really powerful in some of these new sets. And also, if you got any good names of decks, because that's always
Oh,
a
yeah.
highlight of it. Talk to us in the comments down below. Till we read those comments and hear from you in the future, I'm Jonathan,
I'm Will.
and this was Roll for Crit.
It's time for this video to come to a close. But before you leave, hit that like and subscribe. It helps out a lot. And if you can support us on Patreon, that would mean a lot too. If you still really like us, you can maybe buy some merch off our merch store. We've got a lot of cool designs with new stuff released on a regular basis, so don't forget to check it out.